Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into a Roman kitchen at dawn. The hearth glows dimly, smoke curling toward a soot-blackened ceiling. Outside, somewhere in the distance, oxen creak under cartwheels and a rooster decides it's time to remind you you're alive. You stir from a rough straw mattress, rub the grime from your eyes, and realize, breakfast is coming, and you're in ancient Rome. Unfortunately, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your stomach grumbles. You hope that means something warm is coming, maybe some fluffy bread or fruit. But instead, you're greeted by the acrid scent of olive oil heated just a touch too long, the slightly sour tang of yesterday's cheese, and something fishy. Very fishy. That, dear traveler, is a sign of things to come. The kitchen isn't big, but it works. A low table is cluttered with earthenware bowls, a few small knives, and bundles of herbs still wet from the market. Everything smells like smoke, salt, and labor. And lurking somewhere in this sensory stew is garum, a fermented fish sauce that will cling to your memories long after the last sip of Pascha. You're not a guest in a palace, not yet. You're in a modest home, maybe the dwelling of a shopkeeper or craftsman. Breakfast here is a practical, unsentimental affair. You sit on a low stool. Someone tosses you a chunk of bread, it's dense, round, a little burnt on the bottom. That's normal. Roman ovens were communal, and the quality varied wildly depending on the baker's skill and sleep schedule. There's no coffee. No eggs. No pancakes or cinnamon rolls. Instead, you tear into the bread and pair it with a few black olives, picked last summer and soaked in brine for months. They're shriveled, chewy, and utterly addictive. A bite of goat cheese follows, tangy and soft, with a texture just past spreadable and not quite questionable. Your host pours a little wine. Yes, wine. In the morning. But this isn't the robust red of dinner parties. It's watered down, often 3-to-1, and meant more as a hydrator than a buzz builder. Roman water wasn't always clean, and wine, mildly alcoholic, helped disinfect it. You sip. It's slightly sour, faintly sweet, and surprisingly pleasant. The clatter of morning in the city seeps through the windows. Hooves clack against stone, vendors shout half-heartedly, and someone nearby is already hammering something. The Romans got up early. If you slept past sunrise, someone probably assumed you were either rich or dead. A slave or servant, depending on your host's status, brings out a bowl of pulse, a basic barley porridge. It looks like oatmeal without any joy. You spoon it up slowly. It's warm, at least, and surprisingly filling. Occasionally, it's flavored with herbs or drizzled with honey, if you're lucky. Today, you are medium lucky, there's a thin sheen of olive oil and one wilted sprig of mint. It's like eating your great-aunt's attempt at gourmet camping food. Historians still argue whether Romans considered this a true meal or just a prelude to lunch. The Latin language didn't really have a term that meant breakfast the way we use it. The closest was ientaculum, but even that term evolved over time and usage. Sometimes it meant a morning snack, other times, a light lunch. Language, like wine, got diluted in Rome. Let's not forget, you're part of a civilization with a love-hate relationship with food. They glorified it, wrote about it, and painted it on walls, but only certain kinds of food, and only in certain contexts. The poor ate for sustenance. The rich ate for sport. But everyone, regardless of class, started the day with something small and functional. Breakfast was not a feast. It was a foundation. That doesn't mean it was boring, though. You notice a bowl of dried figs sitting nearby. They're leathery but sweet, sun-dried to candy-like perfection. A few dates glisten beside them, sticky with their own syrup. You pop one into your mouth and nearly bite down on a stone-hard pit. Surprise! Roman snacks often came with dental risks. There's an older man sitting near the hearth, slowly sipping his wine-water mix and mumbling to himself. He's sprinkling something over his pulse, something with a strong, almost alarming smell. You lean closer and recognize it: fish sauce. Garum. He pours it with confidence, the way modern folks might use soy sauce or sriracha. You try a spoonful of his mixture. The salty tang hits your tongue first, then a wave of deep, funky umami. It's different. But not bad. And here's the quirky bit: some ancient Romans actually believed garum had healing properties. It was prescribed for everything from digestive issues to dog bites. One physician even recommended it as a cure for chronic fatigue. So technically, your breakfast is medicinal. Congratulations. Still, you can't shake the oddity of it all. The porridge, the wine, the olives, the sauce made from decomposing fish intestines. How did this become the go-to Roman morning? That's the beauty of it. Roman breakfasts weren't built on pleasure. They were rituals of practicality, status, survival, and, occasionally, a dash of superstition. And now, you've taken your first bite of that world. You finish your meal slowly, the last bite of barley sticking to your spoon. The kitchen air is thick with early heat, the light through the window dusted with flower motes. Outside, the city hums into its day. Inside, you're full, but not stuffed. A perfect Roman balance. Just enough fuel to march, build, sell, or scheme. And there, waiting quietly on a shelf, is a jug of garum. Just in case. You lean back on your stool, your belly warmed by barley and brine, and listen to the clinking of clay bowls being cleared from the table. The morning is still young in ancient Rome, and the city has only just begun to shake off its dreams. Now that you've had your first Roman bite, let's talk about what it actually meant to have breakfast in this world, because, surprise, the concept itself was kind of a fuzzy idea. See, for most Romans, the day didn't begin with a full, celebratory meal. It began with function. You rise, you eat something, and you get on with the business of empire building, or more likely, street sweeping, letter carving, or trying not to get trampled in the forum. The Latin word often associated with breakfast is ientaculum, but don't get too cozy with it. Historians still argue whether ientaculum really referred to a morning meal at all, or whether it was more like a late morning snack, sandwiched awkwardly between sunrise and the heavier midday meal, prandium. Language was slippery in ancient Rome, especially when it came to food. It also depended heavily on status. For the working classes, artisans, farmers, soldiers, ientaculum was the real deal. A solid bite of bread, maybe some cheese or leftovers, was fuel for a full day of labor. These folks couldn't afford to wait until prandium to eat. You've got a road to pave. A temple to haul marble into. You eat early, you eat fast, and you keep moving. The elite, though. They had options. And opinions. Many aristocrats considered eating too early in the day to be unsophisticated. Some even skipped breakfast altogether. You know, for discipline. Or because their lives were so luxurious that hunger had to be scheduled like a dinner party. One Stoic philosopher even described breakfast as a sign of weakness, a giving in to your belly's petty demands. Imagine judging someone for eating toast before noon. Yet ironically, these same elites were also the ones who commissioned sprawling kitchen gardens, imported spices from Asia, and spent ludicrous amounts on exotic fruits, sometimes just to show off at breakfast. One senator reportedly imported snow from the Alps just to chill his morning drinks. Humble, right? But regardless of class, one thing unites all Romans: the meal wasn't called breakfast in the modern sense. There was no breaking the fast as a spiritual or metabolic event. You just woke up and ate. Or didn't. It wasn't symbolic. It was survival. And here's something weird: even the idea of eating at regular times was flexible. Roman citizens didn't live by our modern clocks. Time was measured in hours from sunrise to sunset, which meant those hours shifted with the seasons. What counted as mid-morning in summer could feel like pre-dawn in winter. So that ientaculum. It floated. Sometimes early. Sometimes not. You wander now through the home's atrium, past the family's modest shrine. The household gods, the Laras, are watching. Not judging, just observing. Maybe they saw you sneak a second date from the bowl earlier. They probably approve. In a small adjoining room, someone is polishing a platter. On it sits a piece of yesterday's leftover roast, likely to be carved up for prandium later. But it tells you something interesting: food wasn't always made fresh in the morning. It was often repurposed. Roman kitchens weren't known for lavish morning prep. If you ate meat at all for breakfast, it was almost certainly yesterday's meat. And reheated, if you were lucky. Even the bread you had earlier. That may have been 2 days old. Bakers worked at night, and many Romans didn't have private ovens. You bought your bread from public bakeries or traveling vendors. If you missed the window for fresh loaves, tough crusts were your new normal. The Roman solution: soak it in wine or water and call it gourmet. Now, here's your fringe tidbit of the day: there's evidence that some Romans used to rub garlic on their breakfast bread as a tonic. Not exactly minty fresh, but they believed garlic gave strength, especially to soldiers. You can almost imagine a legionnaire, chomping on garlic bread at dawn, breathing enough fire to clear an entire bathhouse. Romantic. And let's not ignore the philosophical side of food. Certain Roman thinkers, especially those in the Stoic and Epicurean camps, viewed breakfast as a test of restraint. Epicurus might have said, "Be satisfied with a little barley, a fig, and some clear water," a flex of simplicity in a society bloated with options. Of course, he never said no to a good cheese either. Balance, right? But that Stoic ideal didn't stop people from indulging when they could. If you had the coin, you might start your morning with honey-drenched flatbreads, imported dates from Carthage, or even pastries shaped like animals. And you could bet garum was always nearby, ready to be drizzled on whatever dared to call itself breakfast. That said, not everyone agreed on how much was too much. Ancient satirists loved mocking the nouveau riche for their excessive morning spreads. One poet, Martial, once sneered at a man who served oysters and sow's udder for breakfast. You read that right, sow's udder. That's a real dish. And yes, it was apparently considered fancy. But most Romans weren't fussing over sow's udder. They were eating barley, olives, maybe a few nuts or dried fruit, and trying to make it to lunch. It was plain, practical, and usually eaten alone. No cozy brunch dates. No eggs Benedict. Just a quiet bite in the corner of a loud empire. You make your way outside now. The streets are warming up. Children run past with flatbread wrapped in cloth. A woman tosses olive pits to a beggar's goat. And the fishmonger, you'll remember him later, is setting up his stall, already flinging scales into the gutter. You think you catch the scent of garum again, but it might just be wishful thinking. So that's what counts as breakfast here. A moment between shadows and sunlight. A little bread. A little oil. Maybe a prayer. And no one arguing about carbs, just how fresh the figs are. You take a turn down a narrower street, the kind where the light barely drips between buildings and where each step echoes like a whisper. The paving stones are damp from morning mist, and somewhere nearby, a jug of wine is being uncorked, with an oddly cheerful glug-glug. That's right. It's not yet noon, and someone's already pouring the good stuff. Welcome to Rome, where drinking wine in the morning wasn't just acceptable, it was almost expected. You might raise an eyebrow, but to a Roman, sipping wine at sunrise wasn't a sign of debauchery. It was, in fact, often a practical matter. The water was questionable. The wine, slightly safer. Diluted with water, of course, because full-strength wine before sunrise was something only a barbarian, or worse, a poet, might do. You duck into a small papina, one of those rough-and-tumble Roman eateries, part tavern, part snack bar. It's not upscale. The counters are chipped marble. The stools wobble. The floor smells faintly of vinegar, grease, and stories. A sleepy vendor behind the bar pours you a cup. 3 parts water, 1 part wine, lightly spiced with herbs or even a splash of vinegar for bite. The Romans called it pasca. It hits the back of your throat like lemon juice mixed with history. Some legionnaires swore by it. Others swore at it. But it was cheap, mildly antiseptic, and surprisingly refreshing. Think of it as the ancient Roman Gatorade, without the branding or the electrolytes. Just enough flavor to distract you from the fact that it came out of a communal jug that hasn't been cleaned in a while. You sip slowly and try to imagine breakfast without coffee. There's no caffeine jolt. No grinding beans. Just warm wine, tepid porridge, and the occasional hiccup from the guy next to you who's clearly on his 2nd, or 5th, cup. Historians still argue whether pasca was considered a poor man's drink or simply a practical hydration method. Some elite sources sneer at it. Others mention it as a standard field ration for soldiers. And if it was good enough for the legions, it was good enough for everyone else. Plus, it paired suspiciously well with yesterday's stale bread. Now here's something fun: elite Romans didn't always stick to pasca. Morning wine could be fancy too. There were those who preferred mulsum, a blend of wine and honey often served chilled. Sweet, smooth, and designed to make you forget you were drinking before the city's sundials even cast a shadow. The kind of drink that said, "I don't need to work today, or ever." Imagine lounging on a mosaic bench in a private garden, sipping mulsum while slaves bustle about collecting dew from leaves. Yes, that was actually a thing. You lift your cup with 2 fingers, pinky slightly raised, very refined. The taste is golden and light, like drinking sunlight. And you pretend not to hear the neighbor arguing with his goats in the alley. Garum, meanwhile, is making its own quiet entrance. Not in your cup, thankfully, but back at the papina's counter, someone spooning a dark liquid onto a flatbread topped with soft cheese. It smells fishy, rich, slightly fermented, a smell you'll grow oddly fond of, like how your first whiff of blue cheese terrified you, but now you proudly order the stinkiest wedge on the board. The man eating it nods in your direction, as if to say, "You'll get there." And you might. After all, garum wasn't just a condiment, it was a philosophy. It stood for preservation, practicality, and a pinch of showmanship. The kind of ingredient that could say, "I understand flavor, and I'm not afraid of fish guts." Back to wine. There's a quiet debate among scholars about just how much wine Romans drank. The evidence suggests, a lot. But it was usually watered, often flavored, and rarely consumed alone. You drank wine with food, with company, and sometimes even with medicine. Ancient medical texts mention wine as a delivery system for herbs, minerals, and whatever else the physician thought might chase away your demons or your cough. And here's the quirky twist of the morning: some Romans believed specific wines were good for specific moods. Feeling sluggish? Try a young, white Falernian. Got too many thoughts in your head? Go for a dry, aged red, preferably one that's been buried in clay jars in Campania for a decade. There were even breakfast wines recommended by physicians. Think of them as the ancient version of a mimosa, only prescribed by a guy in a toga who still believed in balancing humors. You step back outside. The light is growing stronger now, and so is the noise. The city wakes up in layers, first the carts, then the vendors, then the gossip. And now, the scent of cooking fish floats through the air. It's too early for lunch, and yet, someone is frying something. Probably eel. Romans loved eel. The less said about that, the better, for now. You wander down a residential lane, past tiny shrines built into walls, their marble eyes watching you. At one home, a servant is kneeling beside a water jug, pouring what looks like wine into a small bowl set on a pedestal. An offering to the household spirits. Yes, even the gods had a morning routine. And apparently, they liked their wine room temperature. So you've drunk your Pascha, sampled the garum, and endured the confusion of Roman meal terminology. You're already more Roman than most tourists. Congratulations. But don't get too confident just yet. Breakfast, in this world, is more than a meal. It's a mirror of the empire, practical, unpredictable, and just a little bit vinegary. One last glance back at the papina shows a new customer slumping onto the stool you just vacated. He orders the same thing you did. Bread, cheese, maybe a fig. And wine. Always wine. You move on, the taste of diluted grapes still clinging to your tongue, wondering quietly, who decided coffee was the better option, anyway. You follow the noise now, the dull clang of pots, the slap of wet fish on stone countertops, the creak of carts too full for their wheels. You're heading toward the Forum Piscarium, the fish market, tucked near the Tiber where the air is always thick with brine and bold negotiations. It's early, but business here never sleeps. If you want the best catch, you show up before your sandals even have time to warm up. This is the empire's morning heart. No temples here. No politics, unless you count the politics of haggling. Just salt, scales, and the sharp tang of ambition. And fish, obviously. Every kind of fish you can imagine and plenty you'd never want to. The Romans, bless them, were not picky. You duck beneath a faded awning and get smacked with the scent of tuna, eel, sardine, mackerel, raw, salted, dried, even slightly fermented. And yes, that unmistakable perfume of garum again. It's here, always here, like a funky old uncle who just refuses to leave. At a corner stall, a merchant is shouting about the freshness of his coleas, a kind of mackerel used in the better garum batches. He's got a bucket full of the silver-bellied things, eyes still glassy. The buyer, a round woman with a basket and an even rounder laugh, pokes one suspiciously and grunts approval. Sale closed. Now here's the thing about garum, it didn't start out fancy. It started out practical. Salting fish was one of the oldest preservation techniques known to mankind. Add a little fermentation, some time, and a lot of patience, and boom, you get the golden liquid Romans called liquamen or garum. Think of it as Roman Worcestershire sauce, only less polite. But here's the scholarly mystery, historians still argue whether liquamen and garum were actually different products or just two names for the same thing at different price points. Some recipes use them interchangeably, others insist they were distinct. Maybe it was marketing. Or maybe even back then, nobody knew what they were really eating. What we do know is this, the highest grade garum, called garum sociorum, could fetch absurd prices. It was made from select fish parts, like the blood-rich guts of tuna or mackerel, fermented in huge clay vats, usually by the sea where the smell wouldn't offend anyone, important. And that smell? Eye-watering. Think low-tide meets anchovy smoothie. You probably wouldn't survive the production process, let alone a taste test. Still, the final product was treasured. It added flavor, salt, depth. Even a little mystique. And more than that, it was Roman. No respectable pantry was complete without a jug of the stuff. Some households even had little garum spoons, so they could drizzle it delicately, like olive oil in a modern bistro. Classy, in its own, fishy way. Now for your quirky tidbit, some Roman recipes used garum in desserts. Yes, desserts. Honey cakes with a splash of fish sauce. Sound gross? Probably. But sweet and salty has always been a thing, and when your spice rack includes only 3 actual spices, you get creative. And that creativity extended to breakfast. Picture this, a baked barley porridge, thick and sticky, sweetened with honey, laced with nuts, and, wait for it, touched with a few drops of garum. The idea was to balance the sweetness with umami. You wouldn't even know the fish sauce was there. Hopefully. One writer even claims that garum was used as a hangover cure. You drink too much Falernian the night before. A teaspoon of garum in warm water might just pull you back from the edge. Or push you over it. The ancient sources are, let's say, ambiguous. You leave the market now, passing a teenage apprentice scraping scales into a gutter. The street cats follow him like groupies. He smells of vinegar and seaweed and crushed ambition. He probably dreams of being a fishmonger himself one day. Or maybe of escaping the city entirely. Outside the market's edge, you spot something rare, a traveling garum vendor with small amphorae strapped to a donkey cart. His wares are labeled in red paint, some for the elite, some for everyday kitchens, and one ominously marked, extra strength. You don't ask. You just nod. Garum wasn't just local, either. It was industrial. Factories lined the coasts of Hispania, North Africa, even the southern heel of Italy. Massive vats, wooden paddles, layers of salted fish and herbs aging under the Mediterranean sun. The process took months, and the smell, according to ancient complaints, could kill polite conversation in a 10-mile radius. Yet, like perfume from a skunk, the end result was coveted. Rome imported it by the amphora load, carted in on creaking wagons from the ports, carefully labeled so you knew exactly what kind of decomposing fish slurry you were about to savor. And if you were rich, you didn't settle for just any garum. You got the first press stuff, almost clear, like golden syrup. A few drops, and your lentils sang arias. You sprinkled it on bread, drizzled it over eggs, even added it to your morning fruit salad if you were daring, or just bored. You find a shady bench under an archway now, a fig in hand, its skin sun-warmed and bursting. As you bite in, the sweetness floods your mouth, but you can't help but imagine, would garum ruin this moment? Or make it strangely, better? The Romans would say try it first, then judge. And they were right, at least about that. You close your eyes. The market behind you hums with life. The donkey cart wheels clatter into the distance. Somewhere, a cook is stirring a pot, spoon poised above a jar of murky amber liquid. Just a drop. Just enough to make you forget what it's made of. Welcome to the flavor logic of ancient Rome, where even breakfast can smell like the ocean and taste like victory. You're back on your feet now, meandering down a narrow alley that opens unexpectedly into a quiet courtyard. A fig tree leans lazily over a crumbling wall, and from somewhere nearby, you hear the sharp crack of a pestle against a stone mortar. Someone's grinding breakfast. Not chewing it, grinding it. Welcome to the fascinating world of Roman porridge, or as they called it, pulse. If garum was the umami king, pulse was its humble counterpart, grainy, filling, and endlessly adjustable. At its core, pulse is a simple dish, coarsely ground emmer wheat or barley, boiled slowly in water or milk until it thickens into a warm, lumpy mass. Think oatmeal's tougher cousin who joined the legion and came back with a 1,000-yard stare. You peer through a kitchen window, well, a window-shaped hole with a waxed cloth curtain, and there it is, a clay pot over coals, steam curling upward in a fragrant spiral. A woman stirs slowly, patiently. She adds a pinch of salt, maybe a splash of olive oil. A lazy bubble breaks the surface like a sigh. This is not a glamorous meal, but it's honest. The kind of food that sticks to your ribs and to your spoon. Now, here's your mainstream historical fact: pulse was a staple of Roman life across social classes. The soldiers ate it. The slaves ate it. The emperors, well, they had it truffled, garnished, and served with a tiny ivory spoon by someone named Cygnus, but it was still pulse at heart. It fed armies, filled bellies, and doubled as baby food in a pinch. Warm it up, thin it out, add a bit of garum and crushed herbs, and voila, breakfast, lunch, and maybe dinner too. But here's your quirky tidbit: some Roman chefs, especially those with a flair for flair, turned pulse into a performance dish. They'd cook it down to a paste, spread it in layers, add cheese, fruit, nuts, even minced meats, and build it up like a grainy lasagna. If that sounds absurd, remember, this is a culture that literally invented banquet entertainment where actors reenacted mythology mid-meal. A porridge tower? That's just Tuesday. You walk past a bakery now, the scent of fresh bread pulling you like gravity. Bread and pulse were the tag team of the Roman breakfast table. Flatbreads, round loaves, sometimes stuffed with dates or pine nuts. A good baker was worth his weight in denarii, and sometimes priced like it. The daily panis militaris, or soldier's ration, was essentially a massive hard biscuit meant to be dunked in pulse or wine until it gave up and crumbled. Historians still argue whether the lower classes ate their pulse plain out of necessity or by tradition. Some sources suggest that even when people could afford extras, dried fruit, honey, herbs, they stuck with simple recipes. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was habit. Or maybe they just didn't want their breakfast tasting like yesterday's fish sauce. Which, honestly, is fair. You turn into a side street, and now things get fancier. A domus. A proper home, with a courtyard and a mosaic of Neptune glaring up from the floor. You're invited in, just go with it, and the kitchen here is quieter but better stocked. A slave is slicing olives, another is crushing coriander. On the stove, a pot of pulse is gently thickening, but this version has saffron in it. You raise an eyebrow. Saffron is expensive. That's like putting gold leaf on your oatmeal. The cook ladles a portion into a polished bowl, drizzles it with honey, and hands it to a waiting boy who disappears down the hall. You don't see who's eating it, but judging by the silver serving tray and the bored tortoise crawling across the atrium floor, it's someone who doesn't stir their own breakfast. You slip back outside and wander past a stall selling flavorings, yes, flavorings, because in a world without processed food, people got very creative. Cumin, fennel, mint, dried rose petals, even crushed oyster shells for that touch of briny flair. If your pulse needed a lift, you had options. A bit of black pepper here, some vinegar there. And if you were really feeling bold, guess what, you could add a touch of garum. Just a whisper of it. Like a dare. You're starting to get the rhythm of it now. Morning in Rome wasn't one size fits all. It was more like a buffet of whatever you could afford, mixed with whatever was left over. No eggs Benedict, no golden hash browns. Just grain, fish, and grit, seasoned with a surprising amount of invention. And then there's the medicinal side of things. Roman doctors wrote pages about how to make your pulse healthier. Add rue for indigestion. Swap in goat milk if you're feeling weak. Some even believed in pulse antiqua, an older, simpler form that was supposed to reset the body and rebalance your humors. Think of it as the paleo diet, only actually ancient. A few blocks later, you see a schoolboy perched on a step, scraping the last bit of cold pulse from a wooden bowl. He looks miserable. You feel for him. But behind him, his mother is already mixing the next batch. Lunch? Dinner? Who knows? In this city, pulse is eternal. And maybe it's not glamorous, but there's something oddly comforting about it. It's the food of morning routines and late-night snacks. It's soft, dependable, and endlessly flexible. A dish that lets the rest of the empire whirl around it like a chariot race while it sits in its pot, steaming gently. You wander on, the streets slowly filling with footsteps and cartwheels and shouting vendors. Rome is awake. And so are you. Kind of. You've eaten fish sauce on cheese, wine in the morning, and porridge with optional rose petals. Breakfast in ancient Rome. It's a journey, and you're just getting started. You wander now into a quieter part of the Subura, that famously rowdy Roman district where tenement buildings lean on each other like gossiping neighbors, and the streets are tight enough that sunlight sometimes forgets to show up. But even here, even in the city's seediest nooks, breakfast is in full swing. Because whether you're a senator or a sandal maker, the Roman day waits for no one, and certainly not on an empty stomach. A man sits cross-legged on his doorstep, hunched over a bowl of maridam, a thick, garlicky cheese spread the color of lichen and hope. He's grinding it fresh with a mortar and pestle, rhythmically mashing sheep's cheese, garlic, olive oil, herbs, and maybe a few walnuts if the purse strings allowed it. He catches your eye and gestures with the pestle, like he's offering a taste. You politely decline, mostly because your nose is still recovering from the fish sauce parade. Now here's a mainstream historical fact: maridam wasn't just a breakfast item. It was poetry. Literally. There's a short Latin poem, once attributed to Virgil, that lovingly describes the preparation of this humble dish in almost erotic detail. One man, one kitchen, one mortar. The culinary romance of the working class. And here's your quirky detail: some versions of maridam turned green, not moldy green, but bright, punchy herbaceous green, thanks to generous additions of fresh parsley, arugula, or even rue. Imagine starting your day with a bowl of something that looks like pesto but smells like a vampire deterrent. Romans weren't afraid of bold flavor, they practically lived for it. Garlic breath was a lifestyle. The man spreads the greenish paste on a flat piece of barley bread, tears off a bite, and chews with reverence. He might follow it with a sip of pasca, the soldier's favorite drink, a vinegary water infusion that modern palates would politely call challenging. But the acid kick of pasca makes sense after the creamy salt wallop of maridam. It cuts through it, balances it. Sort of. You step back into the street and catch sight of a girl lugging a woven basket full of eggs. Chicken eggs, maybe duck, and, if you're lucky, quail. Romans loved eggs. Not just scrambled or boiled, but hard-cooked and pickled, sometimes in wine, sometimes in vinegar with peppercorns and bay leaves. You know, for that breakfast pickle craving we all get. Historians still argue whether pickled eggs were a breakfast food or more of a snack to go with wine and gossip, but plenty of evidence points to their place on the early morning table, especially in rural villas. Eggs were cheap, filling, and easy to prepare. The perfect prelude to a long day of gladiating, farming, Roman bureaucracy. You peek into a family kitchen, a real family kitchen this time, not some villa fantasy. The matron is cracking eggs into a hot pan over coals, stirring them briskly with a wooden stick. Not quite scrambled, not quite omelette. Just soft curds kissed with salt and maybe a scrap of cheese, if there's any left from last night's dinner. She sprinkles on a few herbs, slices a round of bread, and hands off the plate to a boy who eats standing up, already halfway out the door. Meanwhile, in the corner, someone else is slicing fruit. Not oranges, those haven't made the rounds in Rome yet, but figs, plums, maybe dates if they've come in from the east. Sweetness was a treat, and dried fruit was as close as many Romans got to candy. You're handed a fig, warm and slightly wrinkled, and it practically melts on your tongue. It's nature's jam. Here comes the quirky again. One popular morning dish involved crushing figs into hot milk and letting the mixture thicken into a sort of pudding. Add a little honey, a little pepper, maybe a bit of wine, and you've got a figgy Roman breakfast delight. It's like oatmeal's boozy Mediterranean cousin. Not bad, considering refrigerators haven't been invented yet. You duck into a small shop where a vendor sells morning snacks. Think of it as a Roman grab-and-go. There's a pan of hot chickpeas, roasted and salted. Another pan holds leftover lentils in garlicky oil. You grab a skewer with something vaguely fishy wrapped around a prune. Salty, sweet, chewy. It's weirdly addictive. He offers a small cup of mulsum, that's wine mixed with honey, which sounds like a dinner drink, but nope, it's for breakfast too. Especially if you're trying to show off. Mulsum was a luxurious little sip to start the day with a smile and maybe some dental regret. It was considered warming and healthful. If you were especially posh, you might sip it from a glass blown in Alexandria. Meanwhile, the street bustles on. Overheard snippets of breakfast gossip fly: someone's cousin's dog ate too many olives, someone else's husband hasn't paid the sausage vendor in 3 weeks. It's all part of the morning hum. The smells change with every step: burnt barley, fresh citrus leaves, animal dung, warm oil, lavender soap, stale garum, still lingering in your memory. You stop at a cart with fresh libum, a sacrificial cheese bread, originally offered to the gods, now repurposed for mortal breakfast. Soft, fluffy, slightly sweet, topped with sesame seeds or herbs. A mini cheesecake's ancient cousin. You take a bite, and it's surprisingly tender, a break from all the porridge and pickles. And in the background, someone is singing. A street performer, maybe. His voice rises and falls like warm wind, and you lean against a stone column, eyes half closed, full of cheese bread and strange joy. In Rome, breakfast isn't about sitting down with a fork and a full plate. It's a rhythm, a scatter of flavors, a mosaic of textures and smells. There's no right way to do it. Just 1,000 little rituals happening all at once, in kitchens, alleys, and hearts. And for all its strangeness, the vinegar drinks, the garlic paste, the fig pudding, it feels oddly familiar. People waking up, grabbing what they can, feeding kids, sneaking bites before work. It's a different world, sure. But the hunger? That's eternal. You cross a little bridge now, barely wider than your shoulders, spanning one of Rome's lesser-known aqueduct channels. The trickle of water below sounds like someone whispering secrets just out of earshot. On the far side, a cluster of market stalls huddle like pigeons before dawn. This is where the real breakfast deals go down, vendors with portable grills, trays of bread still warm from the communal oven, and baskets of something that smells suspiciously like yesterday's fish. One vendor, wearing a tunic that's more patched than fabric, grins and waves you over. He holds up a skewer, a sardine, skewered between 2 prunes and wrapped in grape leaf. You raise an eyebrow, but you're in too deep to be picky now. You take a bite. Salty. Sweet. Smoky. Definitely strange. And kind of good. Your palate is either adapting or giving up. This brings us to a very Roman phenomenon: sweet and savory breakfast combinations. Today, we might think of maple bacon or honey-drizzled brie as gourmet, but Romans were doing that dance 2,000 years ago, with way fewer napkins. They loved blending tastes, sweet with sour, savory with sugar, garlic with honey, figs with anchovies. To them, balance wasn't the goal. Contrast was. Here's your mainstream historical fact: the Roman cookbook Apicius, compiled centuries after some of these habits began, features recipes with wild ingredient pairings, many of which made their way onto the Roman breakfast table. Pork stewed in wine and honey. Bread rolls stuffed with pine nuts, pepper, and raisins. Lentils cooked in fish sauce and finished with date syrup. You see the pattern. These people weren't afraid of a flavor clash. And the quirky tidbit? Some wealthy Romans kept specially trained slaves called conditors, basically flavor architects. Their job? Not to cook, but to spice. They'd walk around with trays of spice jars and tiny spoons, adding pinches of long pepper, cinnamon, or ground myrtle to each dish like some sort of ancient barista. Want a splash of fermented grape must in your lentils? Just ring the bell. You weave through the crowd now, past a man shouting about fresh almonds and another selling small jars of preserved olives. You spot a boy with a steaming cup, and he's sipping what might be the closest thing Romans had to hot cereal: boiled spelt, soaked overnight in watered-down wine, then simmered with cinnamon and a splash of honey. Sounds like a medieval mulled wine met oatmeal and they had a respectable breakfast child. Historians still argue whether these kinds of elaborate, sweet-savory breakfasts were actually common or just the privilege of the elite. Some point to archaeological digs in Pompeii and Herculaneum that show traces of date pits and pine nuts in everyday homes, suggesting these luxuries may have filtered down more than we thought. Others argue that many of these dishes were aspirational, meals preserved in texts written by and for the rich. Regardless, here you are, sipping fig syrup-infused spelt soup under a tiled roof that probably leaks every time it rains, but today it's perfect. A dog trots by with a stolen sausage in its mouth. A woman yells after him with surprising fluency in curses. You pretend not to understand. At another stall, a man is selling grilled dormice. Yep, dormice. Not the cartoon kind, but the delicacy kind. Stuffed with nuts, herbs, and, why not, more honey. Served hot, on a leaf. It's more of a dinner item, you're told, but hey, if it's warm and cooked, why not eat it for breakfast? Besides, in Rome, time of day rarely limits your food choices. You eat what's available, what's left over, or what you can convince someone to share. Someone hands you a small triangular pastry filled with cheese and herbs. It's not labeled, not neatly packaged, just hot and flaky, served on a palm leaf. You bite in and it's delicious. Tangy cheese, maybe some mint, a hint of black pepper. Portable, satisfying. Like the Roman version of a breakfast Pop-Tart, only one that doesn't come in a metallic wrapper. You sit on a stone ledge, chewing thoughtfully, watching the city shift from sleepy to buzzing. A priest walks by, humming a hymn under his breath. A cluster of women is bartering over lemons like their lives depend on it. A street performer does a handstand next to a donkey for tips. And then someone brings out the garum again. But this time, it's different. Mixed into a paste with olive oil, mashed anchovy, and black pepper, then spread on flatbread and flash grilled on a portable iron slab. The result? A crispy, oily, umami-packed breakfast taco of sorts. You take a bite. It's aggressive, sure. But it's also oddly satisfying. Like licking a thunderstorm. The vendor explains, proudly, that this version includes liquamen, a variation of garum made with slightly less fermentation time and more aromatic herbs. The flavors are bolder, fresher. More like a sharp smack than a slow burn. Romans debated the superiority of garum versus liquamen like modern folks argue over New York versus Chicago pizza. It was a passionate, fishy war of opinions. And, believe it or not, scholars still argue whether garum and liquamen were actually two separate products or just different names for the same fishy elixir at different stages. Some inscriptions suggest they're interchangeable. Others list them side by side, implying a difference in grade, purpose, or pretension. It's the eternal condiment mystery. You wipe your hands on your tunic, anachronistic, maybe, but the grease had to go somewhere, and wander on. As the sun climbs higher, the breakfast stalls begin to close. Lunch preparations creep in, large loaves, grilled meats, huge pots of stew. But that early morning magic, the weird combinations, the street corner smells, the quiet rituals of spiced porridge and garlic paste, that part is fading. You've walked through fish and figs, pickles and porridge, herb cheeses and mystery meats. Your tongue is confused, your stomach mildly offended, but your spirit thoroughly intrigued. This city may run on politics and concrete and theater, but in the mornings, it hums on olives, old wine, and whatever yesterday left behind in the pantry. A breakfast mosaic in constant motion. You pass under a colonnade now, its marble columns towering like sleepy sentinels, casting long, cool shadows over the paving stones. The market behind you hums softer, the vendors beginning to pack up, their hands dusted in flour, fish oil, or fig syrup, depending on which culinary adventure they were peddling this morning. You, meanwhile, are moving deeper into Rome's belly. Past the food. Past the smells. Into the logic. Because now, it's time to ask, why in Jupiter's name would anyone voluntarily start their day with liquefied fish guts? There's no dodging it. Fish sauce, garum, liquamen, call it what you like, wasn't just a condiment. It was a way of life. Like olive oil or wine, it permeated Roman cuisine. It transcended class, region, and even taste. And more curiously, it made everything taste better, to them. Here's your mainstream historical fact, Roman fish sauce was a staple produced in massive quantities, particularly in coastal towns like Pompeii and Carthago Nova. Amphorae of garum were traded across the empire, stamped with the producer's mark, like ancient branding. They even had quality tiers. Some garum was budget-friendly, some was luxury grade, with the top-tier stuff labeled garum sociorum, meaning garum of the Allies, because apparently your fishy prestige depended on your geopolitical affiliations. Try fitting that on a menu. But the real question, your existential breakfast riddle, is, why? Well, for starters, garum was the Roman answer to umami. You know, that deep, savory flavor that makes soy sauce and parmesan feel like velvet on the tongue. That. Romans didn't know the word umami, but they absolutely chased the sensation. A dash of garum could make lentils luxurious, cover up spoiled meat, and add punch to otherwise drab grains. It was their cheat code. Their ketchup, their hot sauce, their secret weapon in every pot. Quirky tidbit time, there were garum sommeliers. Okay, not officially, but close. Letters and inscriptions from the period mention people having strong opinions on which region made the best sauce, whether it was made from mackerel or anchovy, whether the fermentation took weeks or months, whether the amphora was sealed with pitch or resin. You think wine snobs are intense? Try arguing with a Roman about Baedeker versus Dalmatian garum. Friendships were probably lost. Historians still argue whether the use of garum was universal across all Roman provinces or if it was more dominant in coastal regions where fish were abundant. Some point to garum amphorae found as far inland as Gaul and even Britain, suggesting wide popularity. Others believe local sauces may have substituted in more remote regions, especially where fish was rare or prohibitively expensive. The debate flops around, much like the fish themselves once did. But here's the part that actually makes sense: the Roman pantry was missing what we now take for granted. No tomatoes, no lemons, no chili peppers. No soy sauce or vinegar as we know it. No butter for most of the empire. And sugar. Forget it. So if you're working with a flavor palette of grains, legumes, herbs, salt, wine, and the occasional cured meat, fish sauce starts to look a lot less weird. It becomes the flavor glue that holds it all together. As you walk, you spot a row of taverns, simple places with smoky interiors and wooden counters, offering hot meals to the weary and the working class. Here, you see garum used not as a dip but as an ingredient, stirred into porridge, brushed onto warm bread, even diluted and poured over boiled eggs. It's omnipresent. And most shockingly, it's not awful. Salty, yes. Intense, absolutely. But layered and funky in a way that reminds you, strangely, of Worcestershire sauce or Thai Nam Pla. The tavern owner, a stout woman with a no-nonsense braid and arms like olive presses, pours you a small cup of diluted garum tea. It's warm, pungent, and oddly invigorating. She grins. For the liver, she says, tapping her own with a practiced finger. Keeps you strong. You're not sure about the science, but it certainly wakes up whatever's left of your early morning fog. You sip and listen as she talks about the fish sauce trade. Her cousin works at a ceteria, a fish processing plant, down in Ostia. They get barrels of mackerel and anchovy, layer them with salt, and leave them to ferment under the sun for weeks. The resulting liquid, golden brown and mysteriously clear, is drawn off and bottled. The leftover fish sludge. That gets sold to farmers as fertilizer or, if desperate, to poorer folks as alec, a paste-like substance that only the most resilient palates could handle. Back on the street, you pass a cart stacked with amphorae, long, narrow-necked ceramic jugs sealed with wax and labeled in red ink. You recognize a symbol from earlier, a leaping fish above the letters GSP, probably short for garum sociorum pre-made, the first-grade stuff. You chuckle. Even 2,000 years ago, people were shelling out for premium condiments. And just when you think you've escaped the fishiness, someone offers you a garum-laced honey cake. It's sweet, spiced, and has a weirdly meaty undertone. Like gingerbread met beef jerky at a wedding. Do you like it? You're not sure. But you eat the whole thing. Now let's step back for a second. Imagine waking up in ancient Rome, no refrigerator, no cereal, no coffee, no donuts. Your options: reheated grains, old cheese, dried figs, and a bottle of fermented anchovy extract. You eat not for luxury, but for fuel. And maybe, just maybe, you develop a taste for that salty punch that cuts through the monotony. The more you think about it, the more garum feels like a culinary inevitability. A brilliant, if slightly smelly, solution to the problem of limited ingredients and an insatiable desire for flavor. It was frugal, it was adaptable, and it was scalable, qualities any empire could appreciate. And as strange as it might seem to you, the Romans weren't just enduring it. They were proud of it. They wrote poems about it. They branded it. They shipped it to the edges of their world and back. To them, fish sauce wasn't gross. It was Roman. You keep walking, the sun now warming the cobblestones under your feet, and the city stretches around you like a waking giant, stone bones creaking, tile roofs gleaming. A distant clatter of hooves echoes down a side street. Somewhere, someone drops a clay pot and swears creatively in Latin. But your attention is elsewhere. Specifically, on a stone bench just ahead, where two men are deep in debate over a bowl of pickled cabbage. You sidle closer, pretending to admire the mosaic on the ground, but really eavesdropping like a true ancient gossip. The argument? Whether breakfast should stimulate the body, or soothe it. One insists on pungency, onions, vinegar, even garlic mashed with olive oil and salt. The other swears by gentler fare, soft barley mush, goat's milk, maybe dried mulberries if you're lucky. You suspect neither of them has tasted a croissant in their life. This divide reflects something deeper. Romans didn't have a fixed idea of what breakfast is. No national morning meal, no default combo like toast and coffee. Instead, breakfast, ientaculum, was fluid, dictated by mood, class, region, and sometimes just what the slave remembered to put out. Mainstream historical fact incoming: most Romans, particularly the working classes, began their day with panis, simple bread, dipped in oil or wine. Sometimes with cheese, olives, or dates. It was eaten quickly, often standing, before heading to work. Not leisurely. Not celebrated. Just fuel. If that sounds oddly familiar, like scarfing a granola bar in traffic, you're catching on. But of course, not everyone started their day hunched over a bread crust. Enter the Oshiosi, the idle rich. These folks could turn breakfast into performance art. Some had entire breakfast rooms, decked out with painted ceilings and reclining couches. Their morning meals could include exotic fruits, imported shellfish, even early sips of spiced wine. Nothing says, "good morning," like a wine-poached peacock egg and a side of judgmental grapes. Now for a quirky tidbit: some Roman physicians believed breakfast should not just awaken you, it should prepare your body for the heat of the day. Which led to recipes like warm lettuce soup or chickpea paste mixed with vinegar and herbs. Light, moist, and acidic. Sounds kind of like salad dressing in a bowl, but hey, if it kept them from sweating through their togas, maybe there's wisdom in there somewhere. You duck into a shaded alley, where a young boy is selling fried chickpea patties, panis fabata, crisp on the outside, soft within. He wraps one in fig leaf and hands it to you without a word. The flavor? Earthy. Nutty. A whisper of garlic. You nod your thanks and munch as you walk, listening to Rome murmur through open windows and temple columns. Historians still argue whether the Roman lower classes regularly ate breakfast or if they skipped it entirely, focusing instead on a larger lunch. Some argue the morning meal was too minor to merit consistent records, just a scrap here or there in poems and letters. Others think it was more common than we know, but the elite didn't bother documenting peasant habits unless they were mocking them. You turn a corner and nearly trip over a chicken. It blinks at you judgmentally, as if to say, you think fish sauce is weird? Try laying eggs for these maniacs. It trots away, feathers ruffled. And speaking of eggs, another Roman morning staple, especially boiled and dusted with herbs or crushed into spreads. Eggs were cheap, portable, and packed with protein. Perfect for gladiators, students, and sleep-deprived scribes. You pop into a bakery next. The warm aroma of yeast and ash hits you like a hug. The baker is pulling flatbreads from a blackened oven with a paddle the length of a javelin. You notice jars of condiments on a shelf, poppy seed paste, crushed walnut spread, and, you guessed it, more garum. He offers you a triangle of flatbread slathered with a paste of mustard greens and figure. You chew. It's bold. It's peppery. It makes your eyes water a little, but it's undeniably breakfast. Then he shows you something more surprising, a small clay bowl of what he calls meridum, a fresh cheese spread mashed with garlic, herbs, vinegar, and olive oil. You dip your bread. You hesitate. You regret hesitating. It's a flavor explosion, sharp and creamy and alive. You smile. He nods. No words needed. Some Romans, especially in rural areas, favored this kind of breakfast, simple, rustic, made from whatever the land and yesterday's kitchen scraps provided. There was an art to using leftovers, especially in a world without refrigeration. Breakfast, then, was often a remixed version of dinner. Cold lentils. Roasted carrots. A scrap of pork fat, reheated in wine. Nothing went to waste. You pass a temple plaza, the paving stones still wet from morning cleaning. A group of young students recites Virgil, their tutor watching like a hawk. A nearby food seller offers them hot porridge with honey and raisins, probably to keep their brains from melting. You snag a bowl. It's thick and grainy, but sweet and comforting. A Roman school snack. Brains need carbs, after all. You sit for a moment, watching the city swirl. So many breakfasts, all within a few streets. Simple ones. Strange ones. Some designed to wake the body, others meant to calm it. Some sour. Some sweet. Some just salty enough to make your lips pucker. There is no right Roman breakfast, just a spectrum of habits, preferences, and ancient opinions. As you wander back toward the heart of the city, someone offers you a roasted fig, split open and filled with goat cheese and crushed black pepper. You accept without hesitation. This time, you know what you're in for. It's messy. It's sticky. It's glorious. And as the fig's sweetness lingers on your tongue, chased by the sharp bite of cheese and the slow burn of pepper, you realize something. Breakfast in ancient Rome wasn't about nutrition charts or meal plans. It was about beginning the day with whatever flavors your hands, heart, or household could muster. Strange? Absolutely. But memorable? Unquestionably. Your sandals scrape gently across the cobblestones as you drift away from the bakery, fig still perfuming your breath. The streets feel different now, slower, steadier. Morning has settled over Rome like a warm blanket, and the chaotic clamor of early trade gives way to more rhythmic sounds, hammers in distant workshops, the rustle of tunics, the clip-clop of a senator's entourage weaving past. Your stomach's full, but your curiosity isn't. And so, you follow the winding scent trail of smoke and vinegar toward the edge of a forum, where a pop-up cookshop, essentially the Roman version of a food truck, is dishing out something unidentifiable. It hisses on a griddle. It smells sharp and tangy and slightly toasted. You lean in and recognize it, an unusual breakfast item called satura. No, not satire, though the word is related. This dish is an early mishmash, a grab-bag meal of grains, nuts, fruits, herbs, and whatever leftover meat happened to be around. Think trail mix met a stew, then had a brief identity crisis over a fire. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The word satura eventually gave rise to the literary genre, satire. Originally, it described not jokes, but medleys, mixtures, both culinary and cultural. The term captured the very Roman love for combining and remixing. And so it began on plates long before it ever appeared on parchment. You take a bite. It's confusing. Your tongue struggles to make sense of the sweet figs, the savory lentils, the chewy grain, and that sneaky sliver of what might be duck gizzard. It's a whole mood. And it perfectly captures the logic of Roman food: take what you have, make it stronger, bolder, punchier. Balance be damned. Your vendor, a wiry man with a nose like a heron and a tunic stained in 12 mysterious ways, grins and says this was a favorite of traveling soldiers. You never knew what you'd get, he chuckles. But it filled you up. Which is true. You're deeply unsure if you're still hungry or full for a week. Quirky tidbit time: archaeologists once uncovered a preserved thermopolium, a Roman street food joint, in Pompeii, complete with colorful fresco menus and remnants of the day's offerings. Inside the serving vessels: fish scraps, duck bones, snails, and beans. The Roman version of combo meals, painted with flair, because even if it was mystery meat, it was stylish mystery meat. Historians still argue whether dishes like satura were breakfast-specific or general purpose. Some believe they were thrown together to use up leftovers from dinner or banquet tables. Others argue satura was intentional, created not from scarcity, but from the delight of combining contrasting ingredients. Whatever the case, it was one of the few truly democratic Roman dishes. Rich, poor, soldier, senator, everyone had a version. You rinse your mouth with a sip of watered wine, more for ceremony than thirst, and press onward. Around the corner, you find yourself at the edge of a public bath. Men in towels lounge on benches, chatting, oiling themselves, or arguing over politics in loud, echoing voices. One holds a cup of something yellow and frothy. Curiosity gets the better of you. You ask. He offers. You sip. It's a mixture of egg yolk, honey, and warm milk, a proto-protein shake favored by athletes and those trying to build what we'll generously call biceps. Romans didn't lift weights for Instagram, but they did compete in wrestling, boxing, and javelin. And this breakfast? This was their pre-workout blend. The taste is rich and comforting, like custard if it gave motivational speeches. And the texture is, surprisingly nice. Frothy, thick, slightly sweet. You can imagine gladiators downing this before strapping on greaves and heading to the arena. Or senators pretending they train legs between votes. Now, here's the real kicker. The logic behind this drink ties directly into the Roman obsession with humors, not the kind you laugh at, but the bodily fluids. According to Roman medicine, your health was governed by the balance of 4 humors: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Foods had properties: hot, cold, moist, dry, and consuming the right combination supposedly stabilized you. This drink? Warm. Moist. Sweet. Perfect for balancing out a cold, dry temperament. Especially if you were waking up cranky after a wine-soaked night. Which, let's be honest, most Romans were. Including you, apparently. You pass through the bathhouse's warm interior, hearing snippets of morning gossip. Someone's been caught bribing a magistrate. Someone else swears their cousin invented a new kind of olive press. In the background, the soft clink of dishes. Even in a bathhouse, food finds a way. You exit through the rear and come across another tavern, this one quieter, with stone benches and a few elderly men reading scrolls. The owner, a woman with the calm of someone who has seen every kind of customer, offers you something unusual. A bowl of warm millet porridge, topped with grated cheese and black pepper. No sugar, no fruit. Just grain, dairy, and spice. You pause. You taste. You pause again. It's weird. But it grows on you. It's hearty and grounding and oddly sophisticated. A reminder that not all Roman breakfasts were flavor riots. Some were subtle, smooth, built for long conversations and slow digestion. Like this one. And suddenly, that's the theme emerging today. Rome doesn't do one size fits all. Breakfast might be a spicy fish sauce-drenched roll one day, and a minimalist grain bowl the next. It depends on who you are, where you live, how much time you have, what your mood is. There's no menu. Just instinct. You take one last bite, thank the owner, and step back onto the street. Ahead of you, a child plays with a hoop, an old man feeds pigeons, and a cart rolls by bearing amphorae filled with something you're really hoping isn't more fish sauce. Rome hums on, unfazed by your full stomach or existential questions. But you're beginning to understand. Not just the what of Roman breakfasts, but the why. Because in a city of concrete and chaos, mornings needed to be whatever you could make of them. Maybe a bit strange. Definitely bold. Always Roman. The sun edges higher, warming the city further as you move through a quieter neighborhood, narrow streets lined with low stone houses, their doors open to welcome the morning air. Here, the pace slows. The city's heartbeat softens. You feel the subtle shift from bustling commerce to domestic routine, as if you've stepped behind a veil. You find yourself outside a modest domus, its walls adorned with faded frescoes of vines and birds, whispering stories of summers long past. Inside, the aroma of bread baking mingles with the faint tang of herbs drying by the kitchen hearth. You step in, welcomed by a servant who gestures toward a low table set for a simple breakfast. This scene offers a mainstream historical fact: Roman breakfasts at home often included fruges, or grains, commonly wheat or barley, sometimes in the form of bread, porridge, or cakes. These were staples, providing energy for the day ahead. The porridge might be sweetened with honey or figs or spiced with herbs. Meals were often quick, practical, and reflective of the household status. But as you settle, you notice the centerpiece, a small bowl of maridum. You recall the cheese herb paste from the bakery, but this is more refined. Freshly crushed garlic, coriander, rue, and a dash of vinegar mingle with the cheese in a pungent yet inviting blend. It's a flavor that stirs memories in your senses, sharp but familiar, earthy yet bright. Quirky tidbit: there's evidence that maridum was sometimes eaten with bread or used as a dip, and recipes for it appear in surviving Roman cookbooks. Some scholars suggest it was a comfort food, perhaps even a breakfast staple for rural families or those of modest means. It was also rumored to ward off bad breath, an early breath mint, of sorts, if you could stomach the garlic. As you savor the dip, the conversation drifts to the logic of Roman breakfast customs. Why such variety? Why so much reliance on salt, vinegar, and pungent flavors? The answer lies partly in preservation. Without refrigeration, acidity and salt were essential for extending the life of foods. Fermented sauces, pickled vegetables, and cured meats kept food safe and flavorful, even on hot days. Historians still argue whether Roman breakfasts served medicinal purposes beyond nourishment. Some argue that certain ingredients were chosen for their health benefits: vinegar to aid digestion, herbs to clear the head, fermented fish sauces to provide necessary nutrients. Others suggest it was more about flavor and tradition, with health as a secondary consideration. You watch as a family gathers, the father breaking bread and sharing porridge with his children. The mother hands around small pieces of cheese, and the youngest carefully dips his bread into the maridum, grimacing at the sharpness but eating anyway. The simplicity and rhythm of the moment feel timeless. Outside, a neighbor brings fresh eggs, still warm from the coop, and the servant places them in a small basket by the door. Eggs, you remember, were prized for their versatility and protein, often boiled or fried, sometimes incorporated into cakes or mixed with herbs. The household dog, an eager mutt with a patchy coat, waits patiently by the hearth, hoping for scraps. You toss a small piece of bread its way, and it snatches it with enthusiasm, tail wagging. You linger over a cup of watered wine, a common Roman practice even at breakfast, more for hydration and ritual than intoxication. It's a reminder that meals were social and sensory experiences, blending practicality with pleasure. As you rise to leave, the servant offers a small parcel wrapped in fig leaves, a breakfast to go, perhaps for a worker heading to the fields or a craftsman beginning his day. You tuck it into your satchel, knowing that whatever surprises the rest of your morning holds, you carry a piece of this quiet, flavorful ritual with you. You step back into the street, the city alive again, and your thoughts turn to the next stop on your journey, another slice of Roman life, another secret of its strange and captivating breakfasts. The morning sun has fully claimed the sky, casting golden hues over the sprawling cityscape of Rome. You weave through narrow alleys toward the bustling market district, where voices blend into a symphony of haggling, laughter, and the occasional squawk of an unruly chicken. Here, the sensory feast rivals the culinary one: fragrant spices, sharp fish sauce, freshly baked bread, and the warm scent of roasted nuts mingle like old friends. You stop beside a stall adorned with baskets of strange fruits, mulberries, pomegranates, and something that looks suspiciously like dried figs packed with walnuts and honey. The vendor, a jovial man with sun-kissed skin and a voice that could wake the dead, offers you a sample of a sticky, sweet concoction. This moment brings a mainstream historical fact: Romans had a sweet tooth, but their desserts were often humble: dried fruits, nuts, and honey. Sugar as we know it was unknown. Instead, they relied on nature's candy and simple syrups made from honey and grape must. This sweet tang balanced the salty, pungent flavors that dominated other meals. But the market is more than just food, it's a window into the complex social fabric of Rome. Vendors hail from distant provinces, traders barter over exotic spices, and slaves scurry beneath carts, their eyes alert for orders. You overhear fragments of Greek, Gaulish, and even Eastern tongues, a testament to the empire's vast reach. Quirky tidbit: one popular breakfast item here is globuli, small fried dough balls soaked in honey or sprinkled with poppy seeds. These treats were enjoyed by children and adults alike, sometimes as a quick snack between meals or even as a morning pick-me-up. You try one. It's crunchy on the outside, soft and sweet inside, like a tiny, ancient donut. Historians still argue whether markets like these operated every morning or only on select days, and how accessible such foods were to the average Roman citizen. Some suggest that while the elite enjoyed a variety of exotic and imported items, most commoners had to make do with local, seasonal produce and simple staples. You meander further, drawn to a small booth where a grizzled old woman sells garum, the infamous fermented fish sauce that's both beloved and reviled. She scoops some from a cracked clay jar and ladles it over a chunk of bread for you to taste. The flavor punches your palate with salty, umami intensity, layered with a sharp tang that lingers. It's addictive, in a can't stop, won't stop kind of way. You're reminded that garum wasn't just a condiment, it was the backbone of Roman cooking, the secret ingredient elevating even the simplest meals. A passerby swears by garum's health benefits, claiming it aids digestion and even boosts vitality. Others grumble that its stench rivals the city's sewer system on a hot day. The debate continues, as it has for centuries. You tuck a small vial of garum into your satchel. It feels like a talisman, a pungent key to the Roman culinary soul. Nearby, a baker pulls flatbreads from a blazing oven, offering samples spread with a mixture of olive oil, crushed herbs, and a smear of that sticky honey you tried earlier. You savor the contrast: sweet, salty, bitter, all in one bite. As you continue through the marketplace, you notice how food is not just sustenance here but identity, a symbol of class, culture, and sometimes rebellion. Certain foods are markers of status, others, expressions of regional pride. Breakfast, in this melting pot, reflects that diversity. You pause beside a stall selling boiled eggs, a breakfast staple for many Romans. The vendor cracks one open and sprinkles it with a mix of herbs and ground pepper. You take the offered egg, its warmth comforting against the morning chill. The city hums around you, the blend of scents, sounds, and flavors weaving a complex tapestry of Roman life. It's messy, unpredictable, and utterly alive. With the market behind you, you head toward the river, your thoughts swirling with images of strange breakfasts past and present. You wonder what surprises the day ahead will hold, and how much more there is to learn from this ancient city's morning rituals. The Tiber's slow, steady flow glistens as you approach the riverbank, the water catching the sunlight in flickering silver scales. Fishermen haul in their morning catch, their nets dripping and heavy. The air smells of salt and mud, mingling with the distant aroma of roasting chestnuts from a nearby vendor. You lean on a stone balustrade, watching the life along the river unfold. This is your gateway to a less obvious facet of Roman breakfasts, the seafood that found its way from river and sea to the morning table. Fish wasn't just for lavish banquets, it was also a common component of everyday meals, especially near the coast and riverside markets. Mainstream historical fact, Romans prized fish highly, and fresh catch was often cooked quickly to preserve flavor. Salted and dried fish, along with fish sauces like garum, provided key protein sources for those who could not afford meat regularly. Fish eggs and shellfish also had their place in the diet. You notice a vendor preparing a curious snack, small fish fried whole, skewered and sold piping hot. The locals call them allisae, anchovies, and they're often enjoyed with bread or dipped in garum. You sample one. It's briny, crisp, and surprisingly delicate, little bites of the sea, a reminder that Rome's reach extended even into the flavors of its waters. Quirky tidbit, archaeologists have found fish bones and shellfish remains in Roman trash heaps, some dating back centuries, giving clues about diet and trade. In fact, some scholars suggest Romans sometimes used fish sauce not just as seasoning but as a base for sauces served at breakfast, blending it with honey, vinegar, and spices. Breakfast as a culinary experiment. Historians still argue whether fish was a staple breakfast protein or a luxury reserved for wealthier citizens, particularly since preservation methods limited availability. Some point out that proximity to water influenced local diets, meaning a fisherman's breakfast would look very different from a landlocked farmer's. You step away from the river and through a small garden where a matron tends herbs and vegetables. The scent of rosemary and mint fills the air. She offers you a sprig of fresh bay leaf, explaining that herbs were prized not only for cooking but for their believed health properties. You remember the morning's various dips and sauces, now realizing how integral herbs were to breakfast flavors, balancing sharpness, adding freshness, and enlivening rustic dishes. You also recall that Romans often ate raw vegetables at breakfast, cucumbers, lettuces, or onions, sometimes drizzled with vinegar or garum. This contrasts sharply with the modern idea that breakfast is always cooked or sweet. The woman's garden seems like a calm refuge from the city's noise. She shares stories of medicinal breakfasts, decoctions made from herbs, fermented drinks said to cleanse the humors, and simple porridges infused with spices to soothe upset stomachs. The logic, again, ties back to that ancient medical theory shaping so much of Roman life. You thank her and move on, carrying the herb's aroma in your satchel. You feel the layers of the day's discoveries settling, a mosaic of tastes and traditions from across the city's neighborhoods. As you continue, you're reminded that Roman breakfasts were more than just food, they were part of a larger ritual, blending survival, health, social standing, and even pleasure in unexpected ways. The river's calm contrasts with the complexity of the breakfast table, a duality you're beginning to appreciate deeply. You step back into the street, now humming with a different energy. The mid-morning crowd thickens as vendors close up their stalls and townsfolk hurry to their daily tasks. The scent of freshly brewed coffee is, of course, absent. Romans hadn't discovered those beans yet, but instead, you catch the subtle aroma of roasted grains and spiced wine simmering nearby. This brings you to another facet of the Roman breakfast ritual, the drinks that accompanied the food. Mainstream historical fact, Romans typically started their day with pasca, a diluted vinegar and water mix, or with watered-down wine, both believed to refresh and hydrate without the risks of pure alcohol or unclean water. But the beverage landscape was far from monotonous. There were also herbal infusions, fermented grain drinks, and various concoctions designed to awaken the senses or balance the body's humors. The Roman diet was deeply influenced by medical theories that tied foods and drinks to bodily health. Here's a quirky tidbit: some Roman recipes included hot spiced wine mixed with honey and pepper, a sort of ancient mulled wine, that might have been enjoyed as a morning pick-me-up on chillier days. It's the kind of drink that makes you feel cozy in a way coffee tries to emulate but can't quite match. Historians still argue about how widespread these drinks were at breakfast time. Was mulled wine a common luxury, or reserved for festive occasions? Did the lower classes rely mostly on Pascha, while the elite experimented with a variety of brews? You decide to follow the trail of these ancient drinks to a bustling tavern, where a barrel marked with the faded inscription, Vinum Acetum, vinegar wine, stands next to a counter scattered with herbs and spices. The tavern keeper, a stout woman with a sharp eye, invites you to sample a small cup. The liquid is tart, sharp, and surprisingly refreshing. There's a hint of rosemary and something citrusy, likely wild lemon peels. You sip slowly, feeling the warmth spread through your chest and the tang tickle your tongue. Nearby, a group of tradesmen argue over the best Pascha recipe. One swears by adding crushed coriander seeds, another insists on a touch of mint. They laugh and share their mixtures like sacred secrets, and you realize these morning drinks were as much about community as they were about health. You take a moment to notice the tavern's worn wooden beams and the soft clatter of clay cups. There's something timeless about gathering here, sharing not just food and drink, but stories and laughter. As you leave, the day grows warmer. The Roman morning is already slipping into afternoon, and the rhythms you've traced, of food, drink, and social exchange, linger like the fading aroma of that spiced wine. You tuck a small sprig of dried rosemary into your pocket, a token of the morning's discoveries and the strange, wonderful logic that shaped Roman breakfasts. The city's noise fades slightly as you wander into a quieter neighborhood, where narrow streets twist unpredictably and the shadows cast by tall buildings stretch long. Here, the pace of breakfast slows, shifting from markets and taverns to domestic kitchens and family tables. You hear the low murmur of conversations through open windows, the clinking of pottery, the soft scrape of knives on wooden boards. In this space, the more intimate details of Roman morning meals come into focus. Mainstream historical fact: the jentaculum, or breakfast, was typically a modest meal, often just bread with cheese or olives, sometimes fruit or nuts, quick and functional. Unlike the grand banquets, breakfast was usually simple and served early before the day's work. But here's the quirky side: some wealthy Romans enjoyed breakfasts that were almost miniature feasts, complete with eggs, fresh fish, honeyed pastries, and even cold cuts. Evidence from ancient cookbooks hints at recipes for breakfast delicacies, such as pullum frontonianum, a chicken dish flavored with fish sauce and spices, showing the variety of morning fare available to those with means. Historians still argue how common such elaborate breakfasts were. Did most Romans ever taste these dishes, or were they confined to the elite? Some suggest that cookbooks reflect aspirational dining more than everyday reality. As you peer through one kitchen window, you see a matron arranging a small platter with care: slices of rustic bread, wedges of fresh cheese, a handful of olives, and a small bowl of honey. Nearby, a young servant carries a steaming cup of warm water infused with mint and a slice of dried fruit, a simple but aromatic beverage to start the day. You notice a wooden mortar and pestle on the table, remnants of crushed herbs and spices still clinging to the sides. This humble tool was crucial to preparing many dishes, including those strange, pungent spreads and sauces you've encountered. Garlic, coriander, rue, these were flavor foundations. Quirky tidbit: some Roman authors recommended starting the day with a mouthful of vinegar or sour wine to cleanse the palate and stimulate digestion. This practice sounds extreme by modern standards but fit neatly into their beliefs about health and bodily balance. You think back to earlier breakfasts, where vinegar was a key ingredient in drinks and sauces. The logic unfolds: acidity was central not only to preservation but also to morning rituals thought to awaken both body and spirit. As the family gathers around the small table, you notice how meals doubled as social time. Breakfast wasn't just about fuel but about connection, a moment to align family rhythms before the day pulled everyone in different directions. You linger, savoring the domestic warmth and simplicity, then step back into the street. The city hums with life, the morning fading gently toward midday. Your journey through Roman breakfasts continues, layered with flavors, stories, and the timeless pulse of daily life. You stroll onward, passing through a crowded square where laborers pause briefly to rest and share bits of food. The mingling scents of leather, sweat, and street food mingle thickly in the air. Here, the morning meal takes on a more practical, on-the-go character, far from the leisurely breakfasts of the wealthy or the slow domestic rituals of the city's quieter corners. Mainstream historical fact: many Romans, especially workers, ate ientaculum, a simple, portable breakfast, while already en route to their jobs. This might be a piece of bread dipped in olive oil, some dried fruit, or a small helping of cheese or cured meat. The goal was efficiency, sustaining energy without slowing down. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have uncovered evidence of small clay containers that seem designed for carrying breakfast foods or sauces, indicating a culture of portable meals much like today's grab-and-go breakfasts. Some speculate that urban workers might even have eaten their morning meal standing at street corners or while walking, a fact that reminds you that breakfast at your desk is hardly a modern invention. Historians still argue about the extent to which street food influenced Roman daily life. Was it widespread enough to shape broader food culture, or was it a marginal practice limited to the poorest and busiest? You watch as a blacksmith unwraps a bundle of bread and salami, washing it down with a gulp from a water skin. His hands are stained with soot, and he talks briefly with a fellow worker about the best way to prepare a sturdy morning meal that can last through long hours. Nearby, a vendor sells libum, a type of sacrificial cake often sweetened with honey and sometimes offered at religious ceremonies. Surprisingly, these cakes also made their way into the morning diet, especially for those who wanted a sweet start but lacked time for elaborate preparation. You sample a small piece, dense, fragrant, and faintly sweet. It reminds you of how religious life and daily sustenance often blended in Rome, where food carried symbolic as well as practical weight. The street buzzes with the energy of movement, carts rattling, dogs barking, children chasing each other, and cooks shouting their wares. You see a few men sitting on low stools, sharing news and gossip over morning snacks. You recall how even fish sauce, with its strong aroma, was sometimes part of these portable meals, mixed with bread or used as a dip for hard cheeses, making a quick but flavorful bite. As the sun climbs higher, the crowd thickens, and you feel the pulse of a city waking fully to the day. The diversity of breakfast styles reflects Rome's complexity: class, occupation, region, and personal taste all shaping what and how people ate. You tuck your memories of these street breakfasts into your satchel and prepare to move deeper into the day's unfolding story. There's still so much more to uncover in the strange world of Roman mornings. You leave the noisy streets behind and wander toward the outskirts of the city, where villas with sprawling gardens and marble columns rise against the horizon. The air here is quieter, perfumed with flowering shrubs and the faint scent of fresh earth turned by gardeners. This is the realm of Rome's wealthy elite, whose breakfasts reflect not just sustenance but a display of status and indulgence. Mainstream historical fact: elite Romans often enjoyed a late, elaborate breakfast called ientaculum, which might include delicacies like eggs, fresh fish, cheeses, fruits, and pastries, sometimes served with honey and spiced wine. This was not a mere meal but a social ritual, signaling refinement and leisure. Quirky tidbit: some aristocrats reportedly enjoyed exotic foods at breakfast, such as dormice stuffed with minced meat and spices, a delicacy considered both a luxury and a conversation piece. You imagine the little roasted morsels served on silver platters, eliciting both delight and, perhaps, mild horror from guests. Historians still argue how frequently such lavish breakfasts occurred. Were these extravagant spreads daily norms for the elite, or reserved for special occasions? Some suggest that ancient cookbooks may exaggerate elite habits to impress or instruct. As you stroll through a marble colonnade, you glimpse a banquet table set with gleaming plates and ornate cups. Servants bustle nearby, bringing trays laden with figs, dates, fresh cheese, and small loaves of sweetened bread. The scene smells of lavender and olive oil, the air thick with anticipation. A matron reclines on a couch, savoring a sip of honeyed wine while discussing philosophy with a friend. This leisurely morning contrasts sharply with the hurried breakfasts you encountered in the city's bustling markets. You notice a platter of olives stuffed with pine nuts and herbs, a dish known as olivi farciti, which was popular among the elite. The combination of salty, nutty, and herbaceous flavors delights your palate. You also recall that these breakfasts often included a variety of breads, some enriched with cheese or spiced with pepper and coriander, adding complexity to even the simplest staples. Quirky tidbit: certain wealthy Romans were rumored to begin their days with an unusual drink made from fermented fish entrails and wine, perhaps a pungent tonic believed to promote health. You wrinkle your nose, wondering if that's a taste you could ever acquire. As the morning stretches on, the elite breakfast unfolds into an event blending nourishment, pleasure, and social display, a stark contrast to the simple bread and cheese breakfasts of the common folk. You step away from the villa's grandeur, your mind swirling with images of opulence and eccentric tastes, ready to explore what happens next in the evolving story of Roman mornings. Leaving behind the marble luxury of the villas, you wander into a shadowy side street where a cluster of workshops hum with quiet activity. The morning light filters through dusty windows, catching the gleam of metal and wood shavings. Here, the artisans and craftsmen of Rome begin their day, their breakfasts reflecting the rhythms of labor and thrift. Mainstream historical fact: many working-class Romans ate simple breakfasts, often just bread with olives or cheese, sometimes supplemented with leftovers from the previous day's meals. Food had to be quick, portable, and filling enough to sustain hours of manual labor. Quirky tidbit: some craftsmen reportedly enjoyed a peculiar breakfast drink made from fermented barley and honey, a mildly alcoholic brew known as cerevisia. This drink might have provided both hydration and energy, somewhat like an ancient energy drink, though with a buzz. Historians still argue the role of such fermented grain beverages in daily Roman life. Were they mainly consumed recreationally, or did they serve a functional purpose as staple morning nutrition for the working classes? You watch as a blacksmith unwraps a simple bundle of bread and cheese, dipping it into a small pot of garum. The salty, pungent fish sauce seems an odd accompaniment to his humble meal, but you remember how vital this ingredient was across classes, even if the intensity of its use varied. Nearby, a potter cracks open a boiled egg, sprinkling it with herbs freshly crushed in a tiny mortar. You recall earlier glimpses of herb gardens and the medicinal importance Romans placed on plants like coriander, rue, and mint, not just for flavor but for their believed health benefits. You also notice a young apprentice dipping stale bread into a bowl of spiced honey, a modest treat that suggests even the working poor found small ways to enjoy their mornings. Quirky tidbit: some Romans began their days with raw onions or garlic, foods thought to strengthen the body but also known to clear the sinuses and intimidate neighbors at close quarters. The smell alone might have doubled as a natural social distancing tool. You watch as the workshop doors swing open wider, the workers set to their tasks with renewed vigor after their breakfasts. The interplay of modest nourishment and hard labor highlights the essential role of breakfast in supporting Rome's vibrant economy. As you step back onto the busy street, the contrasts in Roman morning life feel more vivid than ever, from the rich aromas of garum to the smoky, earthy sense of artisan breakfasts. You fold these sensory threads into your journey, sensing the many layers beneath the simple act of eating in an ancient city. You drift into a quieter part of the city, where the mosaic-tiled floors of a bathhouse gleam beneath the morning light. The muffled sounds of water and distant voices create a soothing atmosphere as you step inside, joining the stream of Romans arriving to start their daily rituals, not just of cleanliness but of socializing and, of course, eating. Mainstream historical fact: public baths, or thermae, were central to Roman social life and often included spaces where patrons could grab simple meals or snacks after bathing. Some historians suggest that light breakfasts or early lunches were commonly enjoyed in these settings. Quirky tidbit: evidence suggests that some bathhouses had small bars or food stalls selling bread dipped in garum, olives, cheese, and even spiced sausages, portable foods perfect for a quick bite between steaming rooms and pools. Imagine munching salty fish sauce, soaked bread in a steamy bathhouse corner. Historians still argue whether breakfast in bathhouses was a widespread practice or mainly a convenience for the wealthy who could afford leisure time and extra food outside the home. The degree to which these venues shaped Roman dining habits remains a lively topic of debate. You wander past heated pools and marble benches, noticing men and women reclining and chatting, their bodies still damp and glowing. Near the entrance, a vendor hands out small cups of mulsum, a sweet wine mixed with honey, offering a gentle buzz to ease the morning chill. You observe a group of patrons sharing a platter of fresh figs and nuts, dipping pieces into honey and soft cheese. The sweet and savory mingles pleasantly, a contrast to the pungent garum earlier in your journey. Quirky tidbit: some Romans believed bathing and eating were best separated by certain intervals. Too soon after a meal could cause indigestion, but a light snack afterward was said to aid digestion and restore energy. This connection between food, health, and ritual mirrors the broader Roman logic you've encountered throughout your morning exploration. You catch the faint scent of herbs, mint and lavender, used in the bath water and sometimes incorporated into foods or drinks. These aromas blend with the warmth and bustle, creating a unique sensory experience. As you leave the bathhouse, refreshed and a little more sated, you reflect on how Romans intertwined their meals with social and physical wellness. Breakfast was never just about filling the stomach, it was part of a larger ritual encompassing body, mind, and community. Outside, the city's noise feels both distant and inviting, the morning unfolding into a day rich with possibility and flavor. You continue walking toward the bustling harbor district, where the salty tang of the sea mixes with the smells of fish markets and wood smoke. The air here is brisk, filled with the calls of merchants unloading their catches and sailors readying their vessels for the day's journey. The morning meal takes on yet another shape in this vibrant setting. Mainstream historical fact: in coastal areas, fresh seafood was a common breakfast component. Salted fish, oysters, and even small fried fish appeared on morning tables. The proximity to the sea ensured a steady supply of fish and shellfish, which added variety to the Roman diet. Quirky tidbit: ancient recipes show that fish was often served with garum, but some recipes called for dipping fish in honey or combining it with fruits like pomegranate seeds, odd mixtures by modern tastes but surprisingly balanced in the Roman palate. Imagine starting your day with sweet and salty seafood. Historians still argue about how often fresh seafood was part of breakfasts inland versus coastal cities. Was fish a luxury for many or an everyday staple limited to port areas? This question reveals how geography shaped daily life. You watch a vendor skillfully fillet a freshly caught fish, handing pieces to early customers who savor the tender flesh lightly seasoned with herbs and garum. Nearby, a small stall sells steamed mussels with a sprinkle of crushed pepper and vinegar. The lively chatter here contrasts with the more reserved breakfasts of the city's elite or the modest meals of laborers. Fishermen and dockworkers gather around crates, eating quickly but with obvious enjoyment. Quirky tidbit: some fishermen claim that eating raw oysters for breakfast improved stamina and alertness for the hard work ahead, a kind of ancient energy booster. Whether true or just boastful legend, it adds flavor to the scene. You also glimpse a small boat's cook preparing a breakfast stew made from leftover fish, legumes, and wine, a hearty dish designed to sustain crews on long sea voyages. The idea of a portable, warming meal at sea connects back to the Roman habit of using every resource efficiently. As you leave the harbor's clamorous embrace, the mix of scents and sounds lingers: salt and spice, salt and fish, and the persistent thread of garum weaving through it all. You carry these maritime morning flavors with you, feeling the pulse of a city that fed itself from land and sea alike. Stepping away from the salty air of the harbor, you find yourself drawn toward the sprawling urban gardens and markets where fresh produce and fragrant herbs fill the morning air. Here, breakfast takes on a greener, earthier character, grounded in the fruits, vegetables, and grains that sustained Rome's population. Mainstream historical fact: Fruits like figs, apples, and grapes were common breakfast items, often paired with nuts or cheese. Grains, especially wheat and barley, were staples, used in breads and porridges that formed the backbone of the Roman diet. Quirky tidbit: some Romans enjoyed a breakfast porridge called pulse, made from boiled grains sometimes sweetened with honey or flavored with herbs and garum. It was filling and cheap, popular among common folk but occasionally adorned with unexpected spices or fruits to brighten the morning. Historians still argue the exact nature and popularity of pulse. Was it a humble staple or a forgotten delicacy? The debate hints at the gaps in our understanding of everyday Roman nutrition. You meander through stalls piled high with fresh olives, glistening grapes, and fragrant bunches of herbs. The vendors shout their wares, touting the morning's best offerings. You pick up a cluster of ripe figs, their skin warm and slightly sticky from the sun. Nearby, a woman crushes fresh coriander and mint to mix into a bowl of soft cheese, a simple yet flavorful morning treat. The scent of these herbs reminds you of earlier breakfasts, where medicinal and culinary uses overlapped seamlessly. Quirky tidbit: ancient Roman writers sometimes recommended starting the day with sour fruits or vinegary drinks to balance the humors and wake the digestive system. This acidic note threads through many breakfasts, reinforcing the strange but consistent Roman logic linking taste and health. You spot a group of children nibbling on bread dipped in olive oil and sprinkled with crushed pepper, a humble, spicy breakfast that seems to combine practicality with a bit of flair. The market bustle fades slightly as you find a quiet spot beneath a fig tree, tasting a slice of sweet fruit. Its juices drip slowly down your fingers, sticky and bright. The contrast between the sweetness of the figs and the saltiness of the cheese in your hand mirrors the complex interplay of flavors that define Roman breakfasts. You take a deep breath, letting the mingling scents of earth and herbs settle around you. It's a morning shaped not just by food but by the rich textures of city life, the rhythms of nature and human endeavor entwined. With your senses full and your curiosity piqued, you prepare to continue deeper into the strange, flavorful world of ancient Roman mornings. You find yourself wandering toward the bustling forum, the beating heart of Roman civic life. The air here is charged with energy, merchants hawk wares, senators debate loudly, and everyday Romans mingle, eating as they discuss politics, gossip, or the latest gladiator matches. Breakfast in this public space carries its own flavor, literally and figuratively. Mainstream historical fact: the Forum was a place where food vendors sold quick breakfast options, bread, cheese, olives, and fruit, catering to those rushing to work or to public duties. This was less about luxury and more about nourishment on the move. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found traces of a street snack called thermopolia, essentially ancient fast food stalls selling hot, ready-to-eat foods like spiced sausages, stews, and even hot wine. Although primarily associated with lunch or dinner, some historians argue they may have served breakfast items too, especially for the busy populace. Historians still argue the exact role of thermopolia in Roman breakfast culture. Were they morning go-tos or more for later meals? This question remains open, teasing food scholars who love a good mystery. You watch a street vendor ladling thick lentil stew into small bowls, garnishing it with herbs and a drizzle of garum. A group of office clerks and scribes gather, balancing their bowls as they discuss the day's agenda. Nearby, a baker's apprentice hands out warm, freshly baked rolls to customers, crisp on the outside, soft inside, perfect for dipping into olive oil or smearing with cheese. Quirky tidbit: some vendors sold small pastries stuffed with honey or cheese, meant as quick sweet bites to counterbalance the salter fare. These pastries may be precursors to modern breakfast pastries, linking ancient Rome to your own morning rituals. You notice how the noise and bustle shape eating habits here. Food is as much fuel as it is social glue, shared quickly but with community spirit. You remember that even the pungent garum, so divisive in taste, was a unifying condiment in this setting, bridging class and occupation with its ubiquitous presence. As the sun rises higher, the forum fills with the sounds of commerce and conversation. Your senses catch the mingling aromas of bread baking, herbs, and grilled meats. You tuck these urban flavors and rhythms into your mind's satchel, ready to continue tracing the strange, savory logic of Roman breakfasts. You slip away from the noisy forum and head toward a quieter corner of the city, where the homes of freedmen and artisans cluster around narrow lanes. Here, breakfasts are modest but reveal fascinating glimpses into Roman social mobility and the blending of cultures within the empire. Mainstream historical fact: freedmen, former slaves who earned or were granted their freedom, often adopted Roman culinary habits but infused them with traditions from their places of origin, creating a hybrid breakfast culture that was both familiar and exotic. Quirky tidbit: some freedmen's households favored unusual breakfast items, like boiled dormice glazed with honey or chickpea porridge spiced with imported pepper, reflecting the culinary diversity introduced through Rome's vast empire. Historians still argue about how much freedmen influenced broader Roman food culture, with some suggesting their tastes helped shape evolving culinary trends, while others see their practices as isolated pockets of difference. You watch a woman in a small kitchen preparing a breakfast stew combining lentils, herbs, and chunks of salted pork. The aroma is smoky and hearty, far from the sweet pastries of the elite but rich in comfort and flavor. Nearby, a man slices thin rounds of hard cheese, sprinkling them with fresh coriander before handing them to his family. The layering of flavors and textures reveals a thoughtful approach to simple ingredients. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists found evidence of breakfast leftovers mixed with spices like cumin and coriander in some freedmen's homes, suggesting an adventurous palate and a desire to recreate distant homelands in the morning meal. You overhear a conversation in a nearby courtyard, where a freedman recounts tales of distant provinces and exotic spices, weaving food and memory into his storytelling. You think about how breakfast, more than any other meal, could carry these cultural connections, a moment where identity, history, and daily life intersect. The sense of freshly baked bread and simmering stew mingle with the sounds of children playing and neighbors greeting each other, creating a tapestry of urban life both humble and rich. You fold these layers into your growing picture of Roman breakfasts, marveling at how something as simple as a morning meal can reveal the complexities of an empire. The morning moves on, and so do you, stepping into the next chapter of this slow, strange, and savory journey. You find yourself drawn toward the quieter, shadowed areas of the city's temples and shrines, where the scent of incense mingles with the faint aromas of early morning offerings. Here, breakfast takes on a spiritual dimension, tied closely to religious rituals and the idea of sacred nourishment. Mainstream historical fact: Romans often began their days with rituals at temples, which sometimes included offerings of food such as bread, wine, and fruits, linking breakfast with divine favor and purification. Quirky tidbit: some priests and devotees consumed ritual meals that included unusual ingredients like dried figs dipped in honey and sprinkled with crushed nuts, or even sacrificial meat prepared in a particular way to honor the gods. Imagine a breakfast that's half prayer, half potluck. Historians still argue how widespread these ritual breakfasts were and whether the common populace participated directly or merely observed from a distance. The boundaries between religion and daily life in Rome remain a topic of rich scholarly debate. You notice a temple attendant carefully placing loaves of bread on an altar, while incense curls upward, blending with the early morning mist. The bread is not just food, it is a symbol of gratitude, sustenance, and hope. Nearby, worshippers gather to share simple food, sometimes blessed or sanctified, reinforcing the social bonds that religious life fostered. Quirky tidbit: some ancient texts hint at breakfast drinks infused with herbs believed to protect against evil spirits or illness, early morning potions blending culinary art with superstition. You watch as a priest offers a small cup of wine mixed with honey to a group of initiates, their expression serious yet peaceful, as if the morning meal cleanses more than just the body. The quiet ritual contrasts with the city's louder breakfasts, offering a moment of reflection and connection beyond mere hunger. You breathe in the mingled scents of incense, fresh bread, and honey, feeling the subtle power of routine and faith woven together. The temple's cool shade and soft chants invite you to pause before you move back into the city's unfolding day. With this spiritual note ringing softly, you continue your gentle journey through the strange, savory logic of Roman mornings. You leave the sacred hush of the temple precinct and wander into the sprawling suburban villas on the city's outskirts, where wealthier Romans enjoy more leisurely breakfasts amid gardens, fountains, and birdsong. Here, breakfast unfolds as a relaxed ritual of indulgence and social display. Mainstream historical fact: the Roman elite often began their day with a light ientaculum, consisting of bread, honey, fruit, and occasionally cheese, accompanied by water or diluted wine. This simple meal contrasted with their later, more extravagant cena. Quirky tidbit: some wealthy Romans enjoyed breakfast dishes featuring exotic ingredients like dates, pomegranate seeds, or even edible flowers, luxuries that highlighted their status and access to the empire's farthest reaches. Historians still argue the exact timing and content of elite breakfasts, since much of what we know comes from scattered literary sources rather than direct evidence. Did they eat lightly before a grand mid-morning feast, or was breakfast a genuinely relaxed affair? You stroll past a marble table set with delicate pottery cups and plates, where servants arrange fresh figs, soft cheeses, and thin slices of spiced ham. The scent of jasmine and roses from nearby gardens blends with the faint aroma of toasted bread. Nearby, a group of guests recline on couches, sipping watered wine and nibbling on honey-drizzled nuts while discussing poetry and philosophy, their breakfast as much a mental nourishment as physical. Quirky tidbit: some villas featured small aviaries where songbirds provided a live soundtrack to the morning meal. The presence of chirping birds was thought to enhance appetite and elevate the spirit. You watch a host carefully pour a small dish of garum into a bowl of fresh eggs, an unusual but cherished combination that adds a savory depth to the morning fare. The pace here is slow and deliberate, contrasting sharply with the hurried breakfasts of laborers or merchants. You think about how these quiet mornings in the suburbs reflect a complex society where food is both sustenance and statement. As you leave the villa's tranquil shade, the scent of ripe fruit and honey lingers, a sweet reminder of Rome's layered breakfast traditions. You head toward the noisy streets once again, this time focusing on the humble shops and taverns that cater to workers, artisans, and the city's less privileged. Breakfast here is simple, hearty, and designed to fuel a day of physical labor. Mainstream historical fact: many working-class Romans began their day with a basic breakfast of bread, olives, and cheese, foods that were filling and affordable. Some added pulses or porridge when available. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have uncovered evidence of fast, portable snacks like fried chickpea cakes or spiced sausages sold by street vendors, ancient, grab-and-go breakfasts, perfect for a craftsman heading to the workshop. Historians still argue whether such portable breakfasts were widespread or limited to specific neighborhoods and trades. The exact role of these quick eats in daily routines remains under study. You observe a group of laborers gathered outside a small tavern, sharing large chunks of bread dipped in olive oil and pepper, their hands dusted with flour and grime from morning work. The smell of fresh bread from a nearby oven mingles with the smoky scent of burning pine, which a vendor uses to cook spiced meats over an open flame. Quirky tidbit: some workers enjoyed a morning cup of warm pasca, a diluted vinegar drink thought to be refreshing and antiseptic, though it might sound more like a punishment than a treat to your modern palate. You notice how the food here serves a dual purpose: it's both nourishment and community glue, binding these workers together in shared sustenance before a hard day. You remember the more elaborate breakfasts in wealthy villas and the temple rituals, realizing how diverse Roman mornings really were. This simple fare, while humble, has its own rhythms and textures, flavors shaped by necessity and camaraderie. As you watch the sun climb higher, you feel the pulse of the city's working heart, fueled by bread, olives, and a splash of vinegar. You tuck these rougher, earthier tastes into your mind as you continue tracing the strange logic behind Roman breakfasts. You turn your steps toward the lively schools and learning centers, where young Romans gather early to absorb knowledge, and occasionally sneak in a quick breakfast between lessons. Here, the morning meal carries a certain academic flavor, blending practicality with a dash of indulgence. Mainstream historical fact: Roman schoolchildren often ate simple breakfasts like bread dipped in honey or a piece of fruit, sometimes washed down with warm milk or diluted wine to start their day. Quirky tidbit: Some ancient texts mention children enjoying sweet cakes made with cheese and honey as a treat before lessons, revealing an early taste for what might now be considered comfort food. Historians still argue how widespread such treats were among different social classes of students and whether these snacks were common or reserved for special occasions. You hear the murmur of lessons and footsteps as students clutch scrolls and tablets, their bellies fueled by modest, sweetened breakfasts. Nearby, a teacher offers a group of pupils a bowl of pulse, a simple grain porridge, sometimes mixed with dried fruit or a sprinkle of nuts, energy food for minds and bodies alike. Quirky tidbit: some scholars speculate that breakfasts in these settings may have included small amounts of garum or herbs, thought to sharpen focus and aid memory, though evidence is scarce and debated. You notice the blend of youthful energy and quiet concentration as children nibble their food and prepare for a day of rhetoric, philosophy, and arithmetic. The atmosphere is alive with promise and the faint scent of fresh bread and honey, mingling with the dusty scrolls and ink. You reflect on how breakfast here is less about ceremony and more about practical readiness, fueling the future leaders of Rome. As you move on, you carry with you the sounds and smells of these early classrooms, a reminder that even the simplest meal can be a gateway to learning and growth. You wander next into the bustling bakeries, the warm heart of many Roman mornings, where the comforting scent of freshly baked bread fills the air and draws in customers from all walks of life. The bakery was often the starting point for a day's breakfast, whether simple or elaborate. Mainstream historical fact: Roman bakeries produced a variety of breads, from coarse, dark loaves for common folk to finely milled white bread for the wealthy, often accompanied by olives, cheese, or honey at breakfast. Quirky tidbit: some bakers specialized in novelty breads, loaves shaped like animals, decorated with seeds or sweetened with dates, that added whimsy and flavor to morning meals. Imagine picking up a loaf shaped like a fish for your breakfast table. Historians still debate how widespread such novelty breads were and whether they were everyday fare or reserved for festivals and special occasions. You watch a baker pull golden loaves from the oven, the crust crackling softly as they cool. The warmth radiates outward, wrapping around you like a comforting blanket. Nearby, customers barter and chat, some picking up fresh olives and others grabbing small sweet cakes filled with cheese or honey, quick breakfast treats perfect for the busy city dweller. Quirky tidbit: archaeological finds include evidence of bread with small bits of nuts and dried fruit baked inside, suggesting that even ordinary breakfasts had moments of unexpected flavor. You see a mother handing her child a small roll dipped in honey, the child's eyes lighting up with delight, a timeless scene that transcends millennia. The bakery's scent, sounds, and energy embody the bustling rhythm of a Roman morning, where bread is both sustenance and a symbol of life. You breathe deeply, savoring the moment, and tuck away this sensory snapshot of daily Roman breakfasts. As you step away, the aroma lingers, a warm thread tying you to countless mornings long past, yet strangely familiar. Your journey carries you toward the bustling fish markets near the docks, where the morning's catch is laid out on tables, glistening in the early light. Here, fish isn't just dinner, it's a vital, if unusual, part of Roman breakfasts, especially for those living by the sea. Mainstream historical fact: fish and seafood were widely consumed in ancient Rome, sometimes even at breakfast, including salted fish or small dried varieties eaten with bread or dipped in sauces. Quirky tidbit: the famed fish sauce garum was made by fermenting fish guts in salt, and though it might smell off-putting to modern noses, Romans used it liberally, even in breakfast dishes, to add umami and a savory kick. Historians still argue how common fish-based breakfasts were, especially inland. Were they everyday staples for coastal Romans, or exotic treats for the wealthy? The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive. You watch fishermen sorting their haul, fresh mullet, sardines, and eels, while vendors prepare smoked fish to sell. The briny scent mingles with salt air and the buzz of early commerce. Nearby, a stall offers small dried fish snacks, which some Romans enjoyed as quick morning bites, salty and chewy, paired with thick slices of bread. Quirky tidbit: some Romans favored fish brains as a delicacy, spread on bread for breakfast, a culinary adventure that might test even the bravest modern palate. You recall earlier mentions of fish blood being used in sauces or stews, reinforcing how no part of the fish went to waste and how deeply seafood permeated Roman cuisine. The salty air and fishy scents evoke a morning tied closely to nature's rhythms, where food is fresh, immediate, and sometimes surprising. You tuck these coastal flavors into your mind's pantry, ready to explore how breakfast further evolved in the sprawling empire. You drift from the lively docks into the quieter countryside, where the rhythms of breakfast slow and change with the seasons. Here, mornings are shaped by the land's gifts and the demands of agricultural life, offering a stark contrast to the city's bustle. Mainstream historical fact: rural Romans often ate a breakfast centered on pulse, a thick porridge made from spelt or barley, sometimes mixed with vegetables, herbs, or a drizzle of olive oil, providing slow-burning energy for long farm days. Quirky tidbit: in some farming communities, breakfast included boiled beans or lentils seasoned with wild herbs, or even acorn-based breads when grain was scarce, ingredients far from the luxurious feasts of urban elites but essential and sustaining. Historians still argue how standardized rural breakfasts were across Italy and whether these meals varied significantly from province to province. Local ecology and customs likely shaped distinct regional breakfasts. You picture a farmstead at dawn, smoke curling from the hearth, the sound of animals stirring, and the smell of earthy grains cooking in a heavy clay pot. Nearby, a farmer's wife ladles out steaming pulse into wooden bowls, sprinkled with wild thyme and fresh greens picked that morning. Quirky tidbit: some farmers mixed leftover porridge with honey or fruit preserves on special mornings, adding a touch of sweetness to a usually plain start. You feel the tactile roughness of the bread, dense and hearty, perfect for dipping into savory sauces or soaking up stewed vegetables. The calm of the countryside morning contrasts with the city's noise, but here too, breakfast is a vital ritual, nourishing bodies worn from work and grounding families in their daily routine. You think about how the simple flavors, textures, and ingredients of rural breakfasts shaped the backbone of Roman life, fueling everything from soldiers to senators. As the sun climbs over the hills, you tuck these rustic tastes into your journey's mosaic, savoring the breadth of Roman breakfast life. You return now to the bustling urban streets as morning fully unfolds, where the chaotic symphony of vendors, customers, and street musicians blends into a soundtrack for breakfast rituals across all classes. This final cityscape pulse captures the diversity and vibrancy of Roman mornings. Mainstream historical fact: street food vendors were an essential part of Roman breakfast culture, offering quick, affordable meals like bread, cheese, olives, and even fried snacks to Romans from all walks of life. Quirky tidbit: some vendors specialized in thermopoliums, ancient snack bars serving hot dishes like lentil stews, fried fish, and spiced sausages, early versions of fast food that kept the city moving. Historians still argue about the extent to which thermopoliums served as genuine breakfast joints versus general eateries for any time of day, but their presence speaks to the Romans' appetite for convenience. You weave through the crowds, catching glimpses of street sellers hawking their goods, the air thick with the mingled scents of baking bread, sizzling oil, and fresh herbs. A vendor offers you a morsel of fried chickpea cake, crispy on the outside and soft inside, a humble delight that contrasts with the more lavish villa fare you tasted earlier. Quirky tidbit: some street breakfasts included spiced wine mixed with honey, a potent but popular pick-me-up, though not exactly the healthiest caffeine alternative. You notice how food here is as much about speed and practicality as it is about flavor, fueling a city that never truly sleeps. Conversations overlap: a soldier recounting last night's campaign, a merchant negotiating prices, a poet scribbling verses, all fueled by these quick morning bites. The city's energy is palpable, a vivid reminder that breakfast in ancient Rome was not just a meal, but a social and economic pulse. As you move through this bustling mosaic, you feel the full spectrum of Roman mornings come alive: the sacred, the simple, the extravagant, and the everyday. Your journey nears its close, with one final stop to consider: the legacy of these strange breakfasts and the curious logic behind them. As the city's morning rush fades into the steady hum of midday, you pause to reflect on the strange, layered logic of Roman breakfasts you've experienced, the smells, tastes, and rituals that wove through every corner of life in this ancient empire. Mainstream historical fact: Romans viewed meals, including breakfast, as an opportunity to maintain health, social ties, and spiritual balance, often emphasizing moderation but allowing for moments of indulgence. Quirky tidbit: despite their love for fish sauce and exotic ingredients, many Romans actually started the day with plain bread and water, or simple porridge, reminding us that even ancient foodies appreciated a humble start. Historians still debate how much these breakfast practices changed over time, especially during Rome's transition from republic to empire, and whether social upheaval influenced daily eating habits more than we realize. You imagine the city settling into its afternoon rhythm, the distant chatter of markets, the faint clatter of wheels on cobblestones, and the lingering aromas from countless breakfasts consumed. You think back to the rich mosaic of people you've seen: temple priests blessing bread, wealthy hosts savoring exotic fruits, workers fueling their labor with vinegar drinks, and children eagerly nibbling sweet treats before school. This diversity, strange yet familiar, reveals breakfast as a reflection of Roman society itself: complex, practical, sometimes indulgent, and always deeply connected to place and purpose. You feel the morning sun soften, the city's noises mellow, and the day's energy shift into a slower, warmer pace. The logic behind Roman breakfasts might seem odd: fermented fish guts at dawn, bread shaped like fish, a vinegar drink that doubles as antiseptic, but they reveal a culture deeply attuned to balance, flavor, and the rhythms of daily life. As you close your eyes and breathe in the fading scents of honey, herbs, and salt, you let the city's strange breakfast world slip gently away. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day's vivid tapestry of tastes and smells begins to dissolve, leaving you in a soft twilight of memory and quiet thought. Imagine the gentle rustle of leaves outside a Roman villa, or the distant murmur of the city's market settling into a calm lull. The warm, honeyed sweetness of bread, the sharp tang of fermented fish sauce, the smoky scent of pine fires, these scents mingle softly like a fading dream. You breathe slowly, feeling the weight of history lighten with each exhale. Whatever strange breakfast you might imagine or have tasted in your mind tonight, it reminds you that even the most ancient moments were lived fully, with care, humor, and the simple need to nourish. Now, as your thoughts drift like the scent of fresh bread on the morning breeze, settle into stillness. The city's morning energy fades, and with it, your mind slips toward rest. Sleep awaits, gentle and sure. Sweet dreams.